Welcome back to Stinging Back, where we expose the truth behind online sting operations and hold law enforcement accountable for deceptive practices that violate the public's trust. I'm your host, A.
And I'm M. We have D with us today. Today's episode is titled Manufacturing Predators, the Scripted Sting Playbook. This one's going to peel back the layers on how these stings actually work, not how they're marketed, but how they're trained and executed. And D has a lot of insight into that.
We're going to break down the training law enforcement and vigilante groups receive on how to get men to say things that prosecutors can later present as evidence of a crime. Things like enticement, luring, seduction, solicitation, and grooming.
But what do these words really mean? What do they look like in a real world context? And how do decoys engineer these statements from men who often weren't looking for anything illegal in the first place?
So let's start with enticement. What is enticement? Enticement is legally defined as persuading or inducing someone, often a minor, into illegal sexual conduct through persuasion or manipulation. But in sting operations, enticement becomes a performance, one that starts with a decoy initiating the manipulation. Here's an example of a statement law enforcement wants to hear. So they want to get the men to say something like, "You're so mature for your age. No one has to know. This will be our secret." Now that sounds bad, but what's often not mentioned is that the decoy initiates this behavior.
Yeah, the decoys say things like, guys my age are immature, I like older guys. I can't tell my mom I'm talking to you. Don't tell my foster parents.
And sometimes they'll even say that they've been with older guys.
Now, here's the trick many of the men didn't seek this out. They believe they're in an adult forum or a sex positive space, and they're confused by the behavior of someone who is clearly soliciting them for casual sex while claiming to be underage. This person is acting like a fully sexualized adult.
These lines they use are crafted to draw the target into a fantasy role play, prompting them to mirror or respond to a scenario being staged. So phrases like "guys my age are so immature" or "don't tell my stepdad I'm talking to you," those are designed to fish for responses like "you're so mature for your age" or "this will be our little secret." And here's the catch. Law enforcement and prosecutors justify this setup by claiming it doesn't matter that the so-called minor initiated or steered the conversation. Their argument is a minor can't legally consent to this behavior, so it's the adult's responsibility to stop it.
Right, but the problem with the logic is it's not a real minor. It's an adult manipulating another adult. It's just not realistic that an actual minor would behave that way. Manipulating and enticing a random adult stranger that they just met online, especially not one they lured in through adult forums or hookup chats. This entire setup doesn't reflect reality.
Right, so these lines the decoys use aren't just filler. They're engineered to get the man to respond in a way that can be interpreted as grooming or enticement, even if he's just playing along or trying to understand what's going on.
Most of these men are confused. They've been approached online on an adult forum by someone acting too mature to be a minor. And when the "I'm underage" line comes in later, by that time it's already established that this conversation will be about meeting for a casual hookup, leaving the man unsure if it's a joke, a role play, or bait.
Dee, what do you think about that? That from the beginning, they are setting it up to be about a sexual conversation, and they don't present themselves as a minor from the beginning. They only claim to be a minor after it is established that the conversation is going to be about hooking up.
Well, for me, it's one of the quintessential errors in any of these things. And I've spoken to an attorney about it before. It's where you're unsure. So they're trying to prosecute you on these traveling charges. They're trying to prosecute you on soliciting charges, but they haven't even established that you are for sure that this person is a minor. So that becomes the issue, or rather, a fundamental issue with their case and their stings. And I've even seen law enforcement burst up their case and saying it was flawless. They knew, and I don't know how you're able to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt in court that they knew, unless you're able to, read their mind. Um, when they use adult decoys, it makes it that much more complicated. Take Ruth Powell, for example. She's 42 years old. I can promise you, dyeing her hair, putting on a wig, or put makeup on doesn't change that.
Especially when she's seen in person. And I did personally speak to somebody who was trapped by her, and they never even told him that they were underage until he was on his way there to meet her. And then he sees her and he sees that she is like a 40-year-old woman and she's acting very strange. He really thought she was on drugs. So he thought this was just like a 40-year-old woman who was on drugs and for some reason wanted to pretend to be a minor.
Well, imagine this. So you're a cop and you pull somebody over for, bad lane usage, and you start doing the standard field sobriety test, and you start questioning whether or not they actually went over the line for the probable cause. And then you go a little further into your investigation and you realize you messed up your standard field sobriety test. So effectively, you've lost the integrity of your case. Do you push forward with it, or do you just disengage? The right thing to do is to disengage, because as a law enforcement officer, your word is evidence in court. And when you go in and stand and you represent this case and you're saying that raise your hand and swear that what you're saying is truth to the best of your knowledge, you're not being honest about that. Because if you've already violated the integrity of your sting, who's to say that person is sure that that person is who they say they are? Or it's not some type of role play or some, type of error in the text box.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think, once prosecution gets a hold of those things, they know how to manipulate the jury and the judge into taking that side.
And they are certainly taking the focus off of the fact that they are the ones who did the enticing. So now let's talk about the luring. That's when someone offers something like money or drugs or a ride, like I'll pick you up, or food. And they're offering this to get the minor to meet up, supposedly the supposed minor.
And what do decoys do? They say things like, can you bring me ice cream or candy? I'm hungry. I love pizza. And oh, yeah, I can't drive.
So they say things like that to get a certain response from the man. If a man responds, sure, I can bring you something, then law enforcement will take that and twist it and use it as proof of luring. They may even make subtle drug references to test whether the man offers to bring marijuana or alcohol.
What else is disturbing is how these tactics are deliberate. The decoy is coached, they're trained to fish for certain responses. And these responses, they check prosecutorial boxes.
So, what do you really think about these tactics they're using? Do you think this is really effective in meeting their goal of trying to save and protect children from online predators?
Well, let's think about it rationally for a minute. Sometimes if I disagree with somebody, I want them to say it out loud what they're saying, or let them realize that they're essentially getting on a ship and traveling to Pluto to make their argument, and the fact that they had to do that in the first place is a bad argument. Their argument is, well, if it was a minor on an adult website where they had to verify their and then say they're 20, and then later on tell them that they're a minor, then of course they would have. Well, again, we've essentially gotten on a ship and we've gone to Mars to make our argument. Um, Looking at these cases in a third person point of view, to me, it seems rather lazy and ineffective, because you're essentially targeting a group of individuals who are looking for an adult encounter. That's why they went to a adult place. And you know they're going to be sexualized because they're on that website in the first place. It's an adult website. You only go there when you are an adult and aroused seeking a casual encounter. So it's the most laziest way to get an aroused response out of somebody.
And we know that's exactly what they're looking for. It has nothing to do with trying to save or protect children. It's just easy to use men in these online spaces to create the cases they want to create.
Yes, it's kind of like you go deer hunting and you want to go shoot that buck. Well, I better go, throw some doe urine on my shoes and get this doe call. You're essentially using the correct method in order to attract an adult, and then you're switching it to make it illegal for the purposes of federal grant funds or political gain.
And what's actually quite funny about this, I mean, it shouldn't be funny, but it is when you really think about it. In the end, it's just two adult men talking sex to one another. Because even when they because even when they use a female decoy, it's still a man running the sting operation, directing the female to what to say and what to do and what kinds of pictures to send.
So these detectives are usually kind of weird. I'm just going to be honest, they're weird. There was one, I believe it was in Columbus PD. He was a detective, and he ended up getting arrested for having actual CP on his phone. So the fact that they are so good at doing it, it should kind of be a red flag. For me, it's kind of like watching someone comment on one of these Sting videos and they watch the whole video and then they, still want to have an argument. It's like you're either didn't listen or watch any of the point, or you're weirdly passionate about this. You're either a sting operator or you're camouflaging yourself with virtue signaling.
Yes, this is definitely showing more what is on the mind of the men who created these scenarios.
Right. And we can see clear evidence of this because how many of these men that get arrested on these things have any level of CP or minors on their phone?
Well, in some cases, we do know that it's been added to their phones to then falsely accuse them of having that as well. That's a whole different episode.
It is. But the thing is, they don't expect you to fight back. They expect you to just take it. They say, "We are the government. We are all powerful. We will take your money. We will defame you, and we will make a sex offender out of you." And for a lot of people, that's just enough to make them stop fighting.
Yeah, we hear that all the time.
That's where you sell yourself short. That's where you fail to make case law. That's where you fail to comply with the ecosystem of our Supreme Court case laws.
And that's what's been going on, and that's why this needs to be fixed. So now let's move on to solicitation. So solicitation usually means directly asking for something, in this case, asking for sex. But in these things, the decoy sets the tone and then they step back when it starts working. So, in other words, they're guiding the conversation to sex. And then when the man finally starts playing along, then all of a sudden they back away like they're not sure this is what they really want, which is really strange.
Right. And the decoy will say things like, I've been with older guys. Just tell me what you want me to do. I'll shower before you get here.
Yeah, that one about showering I have seen in many of these cases, and obviously they're trying to get the men to solicit nude photos, and many of the men don't fall for it. But that's pretty much what they're doing. And I've even seen in a case where they actually sent a picture of a woman in the shower, and they were taking pictures of her bare legs and things like that. That was enticing him. Of course, when it comes to presenting it in court, they keep the focus off of that. So then, when the man replies, thinking this is part of the conversation, and the moment he says something sexual, then they pounce on that.
And if he asks for clarification, like, wait, are you trying to hook up or you want sex, right? That becomes solicitation. The truth is, many of these men only mention sex after the decoy brings it up. Then the decoy backs away, creating confusion, Some men just trying to clarify what's going on. Others are following a script they think they're role playing. Either way, they're being manipulated.
So do you think because they are fishing for these comments, and it's taken us years to break this down and figure out that how we can explain how it's the decoys that are doing the luring, the enticing, the soliciting, and so they are creating the conversation. But these things are always have been always overlooked in these cases. What do you think if these things were pointed out more to a jury, these cases would have a different outcome?
Oh, most certainly. I don't think a lot of these cases go to trial, but I think that if a jury was actually selected and it was shown to a jury on how law enforcement engaged in conduct of enticement, it would very easily become a entrapment case. Unfortunately, a lot of people, and it's not much their fault. It's just the system. They financially become unavailable to fight the cases, and it becomes a complete alienation of our justice system because they know what they're doing. Don't let them say that they don't. They know what they're doing. It's simply government gaslighting. It's kind of like what we're seeing now in the Karen Reed case, where this guy who is busted up in the snow, obviously not hit by a car, and if you do get hit by a car, there's going to be more broken than just a tail light. I investigated probably about, I think last time I counted was 750 crashes that were investigated by myself, and a car that's hit by a person looks very different. Um, what you're seeing is gaslighting. It's becoming more and more on stage. That case is not even, finished up, gone to trial or whatever. And there's there's already a Netflix documentary on it. So it's becoming more and more known that law enforcement is actively engaging in gaslighting, manipulation, alienation of the evidence finding process, and they're working with judges and attorneys to do it.
Which leads to the prejudice.
Correct.
And they're gaslighting not only the victims, which is the men that they're entrapping, they're gaslighting the public, the courts, the defense attorneys, and the juries.
Well, of course, that's how they get their funding. So the way these grants work is you need to use them before the year is over so you can get the same amount of money. So they're willing to make a bad case so they can have that overtime next year. They're willing to do that. And that should shame anybody in law enforcement. You are more than willing to make a bad case and you're willing to lose your integrity to make some overtime money. Because in law enforcement, you'll get a salary and that will make ends meet. But if you ever want to get ahead, you got to work overtime. And it's been something that guys behind them has worked on. You have all these different types of DUI. I'm sorry, you have all these different types of overtime grants, such as ticket enforcement, sex trafficking, uh, drug trafficking, DUIs, all that stuff. And if those stuff don't get used within that year or that calendar year, um, you get less of it the next year. So it becomes a bit of honestly racketeering.
Yeah, we hear that phrase quite a bit, racketeering.
That's exactly what's going on with these sting operations. It's racketeering, organized crime.
Well, it's really simply fraud. At some point, it is going to come to an end because it's becoming more and more obvious. And when it does come to an end, it will more than likely be where the FBI is putting in another decoy, the decoy, into obvious entrapment and enticement. Um, Whether that will happen in our time, I'm not sure. I would hope it would because I would love to see injustices, end. I don't want to see people who are good people thrown in prison and defamed. I think that is an alienation of our justice system and misuse of our government and our tax dollars.
And I recently spoke to somebody who pointed out that if they were to get one of these cases wrong, they would lose their funding for 3 years. And that's why they work so hard to make sure they get these convictions and these convictions stick, because then they lose, like you said earlier, they lose their funding. But this person told me that they lose it for 3 years. Do you know
Well,
anything about that?
I've never personally heard of it. I do know that uh, federal money is audited, and if it is misused, it can be taken away. But that's something that's a bit above my pay grade. It would be very interesting. I will say that because let's say they are wrong. Let's just entertain the argument for a minute. You falsely arrested somebody on a sexting where they thought that they were talking to an adult because they're on an adult platform. The person they're talking to looks like an adult. They're excuse me, they're using adult language. There's no sign of the person being minor. They obviously are above the age 18. Their vocal cords are fully developed. They have facial wrinkles. And hey, you might even see some gray hairs. What I just described to y'all is quite literally what they are presenting. And let's say you do get it wrong. You just falsely accuse somebody of being a molester of children. Do you understand the gravity of that situation?
It's a really evil thing to do to someone.
It's beyond evil, and I fear they know what they're doing.
Oh, they do. And they're proud of it too,
It's lining their pockets.
for sure. And so do you think maybe what this person was talking about, that they lose their funding for 3 years? So if they were to be exposed with one of these cases, if one of these cases were to expose all these truths at a trial, then you said they lose their funding if they're misusing it. Well, that would expose that they're misusing their funding. So maybe that's what this person was talking about, that maybe they just lose it for 3 years before they can apply for it again. Maybe that's what that's about. I'm not sure.
They would have to go to some grade of remedial training, and that would probably be the most consequence they receive. It's going to be kind of a wink wink deal.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I've heard a lot of these cases just being involved in cage, and in my career, if I would have done one of these cases that I've heard about and seen the evidence on, I I I I would have been suspended with remedial training coming up. Like for me, it's totally unacceptable the level of police misconduct occurring.
Well, I think if we keep educating people about these things and show them how they can present this information and should be presenting this information, then maybe we can help stop the funding to stop these things because they are misusing the funds.
I agree, and of course, again, we're kind of getting above our head here. That's going to be part of the DOJ. Um, Getting people out like Tim Ballard, or she's facing, I don't know, is it 7 at this point in time, rape allegation?
It's a lot. I think I have heard there's at least 30 women that have come
Gee,
forward.
right. You know, obvious people who are monsters and camouflaging themselves in virtue signaling. That's one of the first indicators is virtue signaling. No one has a need, want, or desire to virtue signal that hard
Unless they're hiding something.
unless they're hiding something correct.
Exactly.
It's like a kid with a bunch of cake on his face, and you ask him, "Hey, who ate the cake?" I don't know. I think it was the dog. Yeah, obvious liars.
For sure. Okay, so let's move on and let's talk now about the seducing and what they try to get the men to say in order to make them look like they were trying to seduce a minor. So the goal is to get the man to say things like, "Oh, I'll be your boyfriend," or "You're so sexy," or "I just can't wait to kiss you."
And how do they get that? The decoy initiates romance. They'll say things like, I like you. You're cute. You look like a celebrity. Or they'll start using terms of endearment like babe, calling the man that directly, or using similar romantic languages to create a false sense of emotional connection.
And here's what most people don't realize. If the man doesn't respond the way they want, the decoy reacts negatively. They'll call him a name like creeper, or they'll accuse him of playing games, like "You're just playing games with me," or they'll say he's wasting their time. It's manipulative. They criticize and pressure him until he gives them the right response. But when he does say what they're fishing for, when he echoes their romantic cues or agrees to provide the sexual conversation they are looking for, then they reward him. Suddenly, the decoy becomes warm, agreeable, and available. It's classic behavioral conditioning. Punish the hesitation and reward the compliance.
This is not a kid. This is the behavior of a sexually mature adult playing the dominant role in pursuing sex. Someone who initiates, controls, and manipulates the conversations to steer it towards a sexual outcome. This is not a vulnerable minor being led astray. This is law enforcement's fantasy of what a tempting minor sounds like, and it reflects their mind, not reality.
So when we look at this and the way that they explain that they were looking for those online that were seeking minors to exploit, Dee, how do you think they're making sense of this? Like they are openly telling the public and the courts and juries that their sting operation was about trying to protect minors online from sexual exploitation. But then when you look at what they really did, how do you think these people are? Do you think these people are justifying in their head somehow that they really are doing something good?
I think that is two coins of the same. I think some of them are groomed to the point where they feel like they are doing the right thing. They are putting away bad actors. Those generally are the rookies. Those are the people that worked hard all their lives and they went to the academy. They got trained. Now they got the blue line on every t-shirt they got. And then you have the ones who know they're obviously violating someone's constitutional right, but as long as they get the good paperwork, it doesn't matter to them. Those are the monsters in law enforcement. Those were the people that, back in the 90s, 80s, whatever, they were beating on people. And now they are in chain of command as far as captains, colonels, lieutenants, and they run the show now and they carry the same level of discretion they had on the streets where regulations don't matter, evidential procedures don't matter. What just matters is the case and the conviction. And that's where there's a lot of distrust for law enforcement in every community, as everyone feels like, oh, geez, he's trying to get me. Well, sorry to tell you this, he is.
Oh, I used to, on social media, Facebook, when someone was going off about, law enforcement being corrupt and, bad this and bad this action from law enforcement, I used to say, oh, no, you're the one that's the problem. There's no way law enforcement is doing these things.
Well, I can understand certain things. Um, I have a whole library of cases in my head, so I've seen it go right, I've seen it go bad. Um, but in these cases where evidence is being manipulated, enticement is occurring, it's just a place in law enforcement where this sting tradition it needs to end because nothing takes integrity and the trust of the public off off of them when you actively engage in entrapment.
Yeah, it's been a rude awakening learning all of these things.
For me as well, I used to be one as well that would defend law enforcement and did not believe when people were complaining about the law enforcement corruption. I used to stand up and defend them as well and thought maybe it was them. un- until I started learning about this. And I know so much more now. But like Dee said earlier, some of them are just groomed to believe this as well and believe that they are doing something good. So I'm guessing those people don't really know everything about how these sting operations are being conducted or understand what is actually happening. And when we can tell when we put out information like this, most people want to hear more about it. They're interested, they want to know the truth, they're curious about it. But then we get those ones that will attack us and they'll start calling us pedos and they'll start saying really ugly things like we don't deserve to live because we are either a pedo or a pedo defender. And those are the people I think, that are the ones conducting these sting operations and doing these things. It's like they're trying to silence us because we are ruining their game. And it's the exact same behavior we have seen from Tim Ballard because he's being called out on what he has done. And so now he's saying that everybody that's against him is a pedo or trying to protect the pedos, and we are people that just don't want to save or protect children. So that's really interesting to see this behavior from them, but that is how I identify who these people are.
Well, I used to be naive and ignorant. It's been, like we said over and over again, it's been quite a learning experience and a rude awakening.
Well, we can see this play out in society, especially with the Rodney Hint case, where the guy went to the police station to watch the body cam footage of his son getting shot, and I have seen the video. Correction, I've seen parts of it, and to me, it looks like a bad shooting. It doesn't look like you can make out a weapon in the young man's hand that well, and of course, the father seeing this is ate up grief and gets in his car, and one of the first people he sees wearing a uniform is a deputy sheriff, and he decides he's going to run him over. In contrary, that deputy sheriff was probably a pretty good guy. He spent 30 years retired and doing an off-duty job where he was, directing traffic, and lost his life. Now, I don't agree with it. I think if you're going to protest the government, make sure you're protesting the correct agency. Um, but you can most certainly see where the public is getting more and more disgruntled with law enforcement. And it's because trust and integrity is walking out. And we see that in the leadership, we see that in the training. I was just scrolling down Facebook, and there's like this teen academy for the FBI, where the FBI is starting the grooming process for future officers really early. And that's simply because nobody wants to wear that uniform anymore. Um, when I was in college for criminal justice. And I remember I was in a classroom fit for 30 and there was only five. So to say that they are starting to discourage people from wanting to wear that uniform or wanting anything to do with them or trusting them, bit of an understatement. That's been cooking for a while. Um, Law enforcement really does need to do a lot to earn public's trust. I was told this by a really old retiree on his retiree party, and it's simply that the respect you get on the side of the road isn't the respect you've earned. It's the respect someone behind you earned. Meaning that that person didn't automatically like you or trust you or respect you. It's that someone else in that uniform came in before you and earned that respect. And we're seeing that respect and the integrity simply just disappear.
Well, and it's because this behavior has been allowed to continue. And as long as we allow it to continue, these people just continue to do worse and worse things. And that's where we are now. And it's time to fix it. So, speaking about grooming, let's move on to talk more about grooming. So, grooming is usually a long term manipulation process. So, like building trust with the minor to later exploit them sexually.
But in these sting cases, there's no real grooming. The decoy isn't a child. The interaction is often short, aggressive, and entirely controlled by the decoy.
And let's be clear, many of these men were just going along with something weird, trying to figure out what's really going on. Some are suspicious and try to get the person to meet so that they can find out if it's a scam, or even to report them if it really is a minor.
And law enforcement cherry picks statements, ripping them from context and saying, look, he was grooming.
They've created a fantasy world so far removed from real life that no actual minor would behave that way.
And let's not forget, this is where they've chosen to put their energy. Instead of addressing the real ways actual minors are being targeted and exploited online every day. Yeah, you hear about the sextortion cases. And then recently in the news from various states, there's been where 28, 24-year-old men have met 13, 14-year-old kids, a 10-year-old girl in a gaming in what is it called? Rocks? And they go to their home and kidnap them, but they're not meeting them in adult chats. They're meeting them online on gaming platforms.
And we know those minors were for certain not seeking out random adult male strangers to engage in sexual conversations like the decoys do in these sting operations.
Right, because these adults are going on these gaming platforms and flipping it and pretending to be 13, 14 years old to get the trust of the actual minors to later kidnap them.
So, Dee, even though you never worked these cases, how do you feel knowing now what you know about what other law enforcement has been doing for so many years and then lying to the public about saving and protecting children from sexual abuse?
I'm not too surprised as more as I'm just disgusted. I remember when I was in law enforcement, I whistle blew on two deputies that I noticed were falsifying police report. And one I didn't have proof of, one I did. And I reported this up to the chain of command, and I was told um, it is not my job to whistle blow. I was then threatened with removal or firing or termination, and was told that I should not be noticing these things, that I shouldn't be talking about them either. I was basically said that I lost my First Amendment right. Employment law had been violated, and I was just disgusted. So with these cases, it's kind of the seance of the same thing. Um, it's more just police misconduct. It's me losing respect, trust for that uniform, um, etc.
But did you know then that it was possible that they could be doing something this extreme where they're causing actual harm to innocent people and to the public as a whole?
I did not have any knowledge of someone just straight up being entrapped or someone being falsely charged on bad charges. In law enforcement, you have the responsibility of, hey, I could change your life with only 30% of I'm sure you committed this crime. That's a pretty big responsibility because it is life altering. And that's something you need to carry with a lot of responsibility. Um, End of the day, you serve the people you are trying to entrap and arrest. So effectively, you are alienating the Constitution. You're alienating your duties. Um, for me, it's just more disgust.
So even though you were aware of bad behaviors going on in law enforcement and the cover-ups and all that, you just weren't aware that it was happening at this level, is what you're saying.
I knew it was happening on a certain level. Um, because again, I've seen people be falsely arrested. I've seen some bad uses of force. I've seen police brag about bad uses of force. It's not as surprising.
You just didn't realize that they were also doing this in the area of protecting children from sexual abuse.
Right. In the setting that police talk about stuff like that, it's going like at a lunch or something, and they're talking about their cases. Very rarely are they going to talk about cases where they just straight up entrap somebody, alienated the evidence finding process, because they're not proud of it. So they're not going to mention them. They'd rather mention taking the old mag light to someone's head and getting away with it with AI.
So let's move on and let's talk about the bigger problem, fantasy versus reality. So these spaces where these things happen, there are adult forums used by people engaged in non-normative sexual practices, meaning things like BDSM, kink, things like group sex, or other alternative sexual subcultures. These are consensual adult communities, and the men there expect adult behavior.
The behavior of the decoys mirror adult men, not adolescent girls, not adolescent boys, and certainly not 12 or 13-year-old minors.
Honestly, not even most adult women, including those in these sexual communities, those that use the internet to seek casual encounters. Not even they behave this way. It's more of a man behavior. So, the reason the decoy's behavior in these sting operations mirrors that of sexually experienced adult men is simple. These scenarios were designed by sexually experienced adult men, projecting their own fantasies onto a role they claim is a child.
And there's nothing childlike about these decoys. They behave more like men soliciting casual sex than minors. They're aggressive, flirtatious, direct, and then suddenly drop, I'm 13.
Then the cops will say, well, this could have been a real kid. And they gaslight the public into believing this was a realistic situation. Just like Dee was talking about earlier, the gaslighting.
Now let's ask a hard question. What are the real odds that a 13-year-old girl is mimicking the behavior of a 28-year-old man on a fetish forum?
Basically, zero.
It's not catching predators, it's creating them. Another story I heard from a case, he never believed. He knew it was a sting. He thought it was a one of those catch a predator groups. And so when he did go mention some sexual things, went completely obscure and said, "We should do this standing in the middle of a soccer field. Wouldn't that be cool?" And anybody with common sense, unless you're a complete degenerate, is going to say, "I don't want to do anything like that in the middle of a soccer field." But instead, the decoy says, "Yeah, let's do that."
Yeah, and that's something somebody would do as a role play. I've also heard from some of these men that in their cases, they didn't even try to talk like a minor, and they even use like complete sentences and correct punctuation and things like that. And so you don't, that's not in all of them. Of course, I've seen the other ones as well too, where they intentionally, will misspell a word or use a typo and things like that. But some of them are just so brave that they're so used to getting away with this that they didn't even actually try to type like a minor would. So let's talk about what the real crime is, the real tragedy. While these fantasy stings waste our money and destroy lives, the real child predators are out there, still exploiting minors and not being caught.
Why? Because law enforcement has stopped investigating actual exploitation. They're too busy playing bait and trap with adult men in fantasy chats they created themselves.
Like you said, these sting operations don't prevent crime, they create it. The government and vigilantes are scripting fantasy scenarios and then trapping confused men who didn't go looking for this.
And they've lied to the American people about it for years. They're wasting millions of taxpayer dollars on fake crime while ignoring the real online exploitation of children. It's time we hold them accountable for this outrageous misconduct.
Dee, before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add or comment on?
It's really unfortunate whenever anybody gets caught up in one of these things because it is life altering. But it is probably the most responsible thing to do is to fight it. I mean, what do you have to lose? Some of these cases where they've gone to press conference, they've defamed you. They made it so you can't work in the state where you've been living in your whole life. Um, Fight it.
I like the way you put that. It's the right thing to do. Fight it.
Yeah, it is.
I really hope we start seeing more men fighting this instead of letting those in the system bully them into taking a plea. And I can understand because some of them are fathers and they are threatened with being sent away for a very long time and they have to think about their families. That's a very tough position to be in. But our goal here at Singing Back is to educate people about this and to arm these victims with this information so that they can use it to defend their cases. And hopefully, we will start seeing more wins when these men take this to trial.
Yeah, it's the right thing to do. Go down fighting.
And so that wraps up our episode for this week. If you're as disturbed by this as we are, visit cage.fyi, that's CAGE.FYI, and subscribe to our podcast, Stinging Back. We need your voice to help change this narrative.
Please like and subscribe. And if you want the truth, not the headlines, check out our friends who are doing the real work. Lady Justice Myth blog, where real investigations are unpacked. Uncage Us, that's UNCAGEUS, our Facebook community. ICAC Unpacked, created by a friend, Norm, breaks down the ICAC machine.
And we have an interview coming up soon with Lady Justice. And we're also hoping that we can get Norm on soon so that we can get him on the mic and speak to him.
So stay with us. The truth needs an audience, and together we're stinging back. Thanks again, Dee.
Thank you, Dee.
Anytime.